So once you get past the point where you understand the basics of JavaScript, like at the language level, so you understand how to write the basic code and do the general things that are going to help you implement your application, one of the inevitable questions that you have, I have this, literally every programmer is going to have this question, which is, do I have to write all this stuff from scratch? And back in the day, the answer to that question was most likely some version of, yeah, probably, or you're going to have to do some extra work. Now, in the, we'll call it the modern era of JavaScript. So basically for the last like 2 or 3 years. So this is being filmed in 2019. So at least since 2016, 2017, JavaScript has grown to a level of popularity where a lot of the stuff that you're going to have to do, a lot of the work that you're going to have to do in one way or another has already been done for you. And what I mean by that is that, fortunately, one of the nice realities of being a developer in general, so this isn't specific to JavaScript, this is programming kind of writ large, is that developers are very generous both with their time and with the things that they create. And so you have a lot of developers all over the world sharing their code together. And so you can benefit from this by using that code inside of your own projects. And what I want to talk about in this episode of Feature Fundamentals is how that works currently. So how do you actually access other people's code and utilize it in your projects in a way that's actually productive? Because on the surface, if I want to utilize somebody's code, I can basically just say, oh, let me copy and paste that. But when you're trying to develop an application, constantly going and copying and pasting other people's code, it's kind of a nightmare. And so what we're going to talk about in this video is how the JavaScript community as a whole has solved this problem and actually show you an example of using what are known as packages inside of your project. But before we get there, what we need to do is talk about this general idea of dependencies. And this isn't too complicated, but when you hear all these different terms, so you'll hear things like packages and dependencies and libraries, it can get kind of confusing because they're all similar or they're all interrelated, but they don't necessarily refer to the same exact thing. So the first thing that you have to understand when we talk about adding somebody else's code to our project, what we're technically doing is we're depending on that code. So we're adding a dependency of that code in our project. And this applies, whether you're copy and pasting code from something like Stack Overflow or you're actually installing a package. And again, we're going to look at that in a little bit. But it doesn't really matter where the code is coming from. But as soon as you take somebody else's code and you put that into your project, you technically depend on that code. Meaning, if you write some functionality in your application and you rely on somebody else's code to make that functionality work, as soon as we remove that other person's code from your project, well, now your project doesn't work or that functionality doesn't work. And that's because your code depends on that thing. So this term dependency is what developers use. And this is again, outside of JavaScript. This is literally everywhere for all developers. When you use somebody else's code, it doesn't matter in what form, technically that code is becoming a dependency of your project. So your project is saying, hey, I need this code for my own code to work. And so that's where that term comes from. Now, the most common form of dependency that you're going to come across is in the form of a package. And this is where things start to get a little confusing. So dependencies, again, can be code snippets that you copy from somebody's blog. So like, for example, on the Clever Beagle blog here, if you read a post that I've written and you copy some of the code, technically you're depending on that code that I wrote. But more commonly, what you're going to do is rely on a package. So packages are different from that term dependencies in that packages are a delivery mechanism for dependencies. So the best way to think about that is, okay, I have some code that you need and you need to get access to it easily. And like we talked about a little bit ago, copy and pasting isn't the most efficient. It's kind of a pain in the butt. So what I can do is create a package and then I can host that package somewhere else on the internet that you have access to or the public has access to. And then you can download that code into your own project and use it. And this is built around a convention. So typically, when you're talking about packages, you're following some sort of standardized convention, meaning everybody's going to write their package the exact same way so that everybody can use it in their projects consistently. So it's not like, oh, if I go to website A, they're going to write their code this way and I need to implement it this way, like copy and paste it this way. Or website B, they want me to download some zip file and then I got to compile it or something like that. It's not that. What you're doing is you're saying, okay, everybody has the same structure to their code and it's delivered through the exact same means for every single person. So that way it makes it more efficient for us as developers. So we can say, oh, okay, I want to, I don't know, I want to use Joe's package in my project. Well, because Joe is following the convention that all of the other packages I use follow, I can basically just use that package without a lot of thinking or a lot of consideration in my project. So when we talk about packages themselves and how we get access to them, the most common version of this that you're going to come across, at least speaking in terms of the JavaScript community, is going to be through NPM. So NPM is a website where you can deploy or you can push your packages to the public. So NPM is known as a repository. So quite literally, NPM is a website that does nothing else but host other people's packages. So what I mean by host is they take the code that makes up your package and they make it accessible publicly to other users. So for example, here I'm on npmjs.com and I can search for any package. So the package that I want to show you an example of is a package that I've implemented at Clever Beagle for seeding people's databases, so generating test data. So if I type in seeder up here, there's going to be a bunch of them, but you'll notice that at Clever Beagle/seeder shows up. So if I click on this, this is going to take me to a page that describes this package that I've written. And essentially what a package is it's a bunch of code structured together following that convention I talked about. So one of the things that can be confusing about this, and you'll notice, so this is the NPM website, and I've got what's known as a README. So this describes what the package is, how it works, how to actually utilize it. But then over here on the right, we have this install command, and we're going to talk about how this actually works in a little bit. But we have this install command, how many downloads this gets per week, the current version it's at, the license, just general information about the package. But then we also have this link right here. So we see repository, and it says GitHub. So if I go ahead and click on this, what this is going to do, this is taking us to a completely different website called GitHub. So this you're probably familiar with, but if you're not, GitHub is a website that allows developers to host their code. And this is precisely where the confusion kind of sets in with this stuff. It's like, well, wait a minute. Didn't you just say that NPM is a site where I can host my code? So if we go back over here, what's the difference between this and this? So technically speaking, not a lot, but from the perspective of a developer, quite a bit. So the core difference is that GitHub is used for developers who want to host, or the term that I like to use is back up your code. So GitHub, like the name implies, is using a tool called Git. So Git is known as version control management or source code management. And let's try and pull up the website here. So it doesn't look like much, but basically Git is a program that runs on your computer that you can access it through desktop applications or GUI applications. But if you're like a more hardcore programmer, you'll do it strictly through your terminal. But basically the idea is this allows you to, over time, keep a history of your project. And it does this through a process called committing. So when I write some code in my project, and it maybe will say I'm implementing a feature where I want to be able to submit a form and send an email. So once I've written that code, I want to kind of mark or flag that point in time as saying like, okay, this is where I implemented this feature, so I can submit a form and send an email from it. So in order to do that, I can use something like Git to say, okay, go ahead and commit this work. So that's the term you'll hear a lot, is commit. So I'm going to commit my work, and that's going to save that version or that state of my project. And then I can use a website like GitHub to actually back that code up. So when you talk about backing up, basically, I have a local copy of my code on my computer, but because computers tend to crash, or, you know, like if there's a power outage, my data gets lost or something crazy like that, I can trust that my code still exists or is backed up on something like GitHub. That's part one of this. So the other part of something like GitHub is that, and this is just the nature of GitHub, the website. So GitHub is a commercial website available to the public that happens to use Git under the hood. So what's happening on GitHub is they have this idea of social coding. So basically I can push my code to GitHub and I have a choice. I can make my code public or private. So in this case, this code is public. So anybody in the world, you can type this URL in and you can access this code. So literally what this is doing is it's saying, hey, I've open sourced this code, and that's where the term comes from. I'm making the source of this code available to you. So this code is open source to the public, and GitHub makes it easy for you to do things like maybe there's something wrong with the code or you didn't understand something, so you can submit an issue. If you're interested in the code, but maybe you're not going to use it right now, you can do things like star it. So you can star the project. And that also lets the developer of the project know that you're interested in it and that you're curious about what the updates are. It also tells you how many other people are using this package and how many people depend on it. And just general like social information related to using somebody's code. So on GitHub, basically this is just exposing the code to the public, but it's not making it immediately usable inside of a project. So the only real tool that it gives you for using something in a project is manually downloading or cloning the code. So you can see here I can clone it via command line command right here, or I can download a zip file. Kind of like I talked about earlier, this causes the problem of, okay, now I got to download the zip, then I got to unzip it, then I got to physically move the code over to my project. What NPM is doing is it's giving you not just a public repository of code that's available, but it's also giving you a tool for doing it. So what I mean by tool, so we're gonna actually Google this. I meant to pull this up, but we're gonna say Npm Install. Actually, that's probably the wrong way to do it, and we'll see why. Actually, there it is. This is the one I wanted to have up. So NPM is not just a website where code is hosted, but it's also known as a command line tool or command line interface. So NPM, and we can see like over here, if I type in NPM and run this, my computer knows what that is. And you can even see it saying, okay, you're using NPM 690 down here. And so what this is doing is it's basically making this tool available to me that helps me manage code. So that NPM acronym stands for Node Package Manager. So the package manager part of that, or the management part of that, is this tool. So it's going to give me a means for installing packages in my project, updating packages in my project, and if necessary, removing packages from my project. So this exists on the command line and it allows me to interact with the website. So the website is the public version. This is hosting the code. This is making it accessible to everybody. But then the command line tool is what I actually use to interface with the website and download code or install things into my project. So that's the basic idea behind a package. Is it's a chunk of code that somebody else has written and they've made it public. Now, again, NPM is making it public from the perspective of actually utilizing it in my project, whereas GitHub is just exposing the raw code. So you'll notice the difference here. Like here on GitHub, I can actually look into the code. I can explore the code. Whereas on NPM, it just tells me that, hey, this is a package that exists on NPM. So what that means is if I want to actually utilize a package, you'll notice here I've got this sample installation script. So we're going to go ahead and copy this. I'm going to jump back over to my code. So what I've done here, and I've already set this up, but I have a folder I've created called packages. Now this is just a folder that I've created to test this off, but if you don't recognize this, what you can do on your own computer is say mkdir to make a directory, and we'll just call this packages2. So that created a folder on my computer, and then I can say cd to change into that directory. So I can say cd into packages2, and that's a folder where I can store the code for my project. So I'm going to change directories up a level, and then I'm going to cd back into packages, just so I don't get confused. So what we want to do now is actually try and utilize a package. So we talked about NPM making this code available and this command line tool basically being the thing that allows us to download code from NPM, but we want to actually see how it works. So the thing we need to do before we actually install a package is create what's known as a package.json file. And I'm going to show you a quick way to cheat this one. So what you can say is npm init, and when you do it just like this, what it's going to do is it's going to give you a prompt. So it's going to ask you some questions about what you want to put into your package.json. We're going to skip this. So that involves a few extra steps. So what we're going to do is just say npm init, and then we're going to do a space, and we're going to say -f. And that's short for force. So what that's going to do is it's just going to force npm to answer the questions on its own. For some reason, I tripped up on that one. It's going to force npm to answer those questions for itself and generate what is the most basic form of a package.json file. So this file is basically describing our project back to npm. And technically this convention, so package.json, you're going to see this in basically any Node.js project, any JavaScript project, whether or not it has dependencies, you're going to see this very often. So this is just describing the project. Now, one of the conventions, we don't see it yet, but we will in a second, is when we install a package inside of our project, npm gives us the ability to update this file to list not only the package that we've installed, but the version of it that we've installed. So what this allows us to do is easily share our project with other people, and they don't have to ask, oh, what version of this did you use, or what package did you use? They can just look at this file and they automatically know. And as we're going to see in a little bit here, npm is smart enough to automatically help them to pull down those dependencies onto their own computer. So what do I mean by that? So one of the things that you're going to see, and we're going to go ahead and paste in... Actually, I didn't copy it. So actually, let's just type this out so we can see it. So we're going to say npm install. So npm here is the command line tool, and we're saying we want to call the install function of that tool. And then we're going to say, what do we want to install? Well, we want to install a package at this address. So this address, or with this name, is a better way to say it. So we want to install the @cleverbeagle/cedar package. And then I'm going to add something on the end. So I'm going to say cedar space, and then I'm going to say --save. So we're going to go ahead and run this. And this is going to do some stuff. So essentially what that just did is it downloaded a copy of that package to our computer. So you can see what it's doing. It's saying I've added 2 packages from 2 contributors, and I've audited those packages. So what that essentially means is I've downloaded the code. I recognize that it came from 2 separate people, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then it's saying, okay, and I audited those packages for security flaws. So it's saying basically like, hey, there's nothing wrong here, so you're good to go. So what you'll notice is that this package.json file was updated to include a dependencies object. So what this did is it installed the package, but it also told us, it made a note, and it said, hey, you just added this package @Clever Beagle Cedar at this version. So what this is saying is, okay, this project depends on this package name up to this version, so 2.0.3. And now, unless we manually update the package or change the package later, this will always stay here. So if I share this project with another user, so if I push it to something like GitHub and they download it to their computer, they're going to see that, oh, they're using Clever Beagle Cedar 2.0.3. Now, in terms of how all of this stuff actually works, you'll notice that when I did that installation, not only did this file update, but I also installed this node modules directory, or added this node modules directory. And you'll notice that I've got this @CleverBeagle folder, and underneath that I've got Cedar, and coincidentally, all of the stuff you see here is almost identical, or actually is identical to what we have on GitHub. So this file tree here looks just like this file tree here, and that's intentional. So what's happening here is when I created this package, I published it or pushed the code for the package not just to GitHub, but I also pushed it or published it on npm. So what I mean by publishing is I upload the code to npm separately from GitHub, and when I upload it or publish it to npm, I give them a version number. So every time that I update the package code, I'll change the version number inside of, and you'll notice we see package.json again. This project or this package has its own package.json, and we can see in here that it's got a bunch of stuff in here. It's got all kinds of extra noise because this is modified by npm when I upload this to them. So this is just stuff from them. But the important part is that this looks relatively similar or identical to what we've got for our own package.json right here. It's just a little more complex because there's more stuff to consider. But you'll notice that we've got the name of our package, we've got the repository and all that stuff. And I want to see, we can. So you can see that this package that I've written, Cedar, has its own dependencies. So this is one of the concepts that's a little tricky to wrap your head around, but it'll make sense after we explain it here. So the idea is that I can write my own code, and let's see, we're going to open up this because this is actually readable. So you can see that inside of my own package code, I'm importing another dependency or another package called Faker. And this just basically helps us to, and we should check it out over here. So what Faker does is it allows us to, well, like it says, generate massive amounts of fake contextual data. So that's a geeky way of saying generate fake data. So if I need to get a fake name for a user or a fake email address, typically when I'm working in development on my computer for a project, what I'll do is I'll generate some test data, and I don't want to have to fill out a bunch of forms over and over. And Faker, behind the scenes or as part of this Cedar package, allows me to make that possible for you. So I can help you to generate fake data without a lot of stress. So the point here is that this package, Cedar, depends on Faker on its own. So basically this is the concept of turtles all the way down. So it's like you have one turtle on top of another turtle on top of another turtle all the way down until you reach basically the beginning of time or the start of the world. So in this case, the start of our project. So here, because the only dependence we have is Cedar and the only dependency it has is Faker, we just have those two. And so if we look again in the root of this node modules folder, we can see Faker was installed as well because this package, Clever Beagle / Cedar, depends on it. So that's the basic idea there. Now, what I want to point out is that right now, this isn't the case because this isn't a project using Git, but just to make this clear, we're going to say git init, and what I just did is I initialized this project to use Git to track the code or monitor the code. And so what I want to do, because basically as your project grows, so right now this isn't a ton of stuff, but as your project grows, you're going to find your node modules directory gets huge. So we're talking anywhere from a few hundred megabytes even to a few gigabytes depending on how many dependencies you have in your project. So basically that's a problem because you don't want to have to push that amount of data up to something like GitHub. You want to keep it as light as possible or as small as possible in terms of its footprint. So like a few kilobytes, maybe a few megabytes, but not anything too crazy. So a convention that you're going to come across is when you're using Git, and again, this is pretty standard now. So I say using Git, but like pretty much everybody uses Git. And if you're new to it, I highly recommend starting to learn it because it's something that's going to save you a lot of upsetting moments in your life. So it looks like that went into the wrong, there we go. So we want this new file that I've created here called .gitignore. So basically you want to use Git to back up your code and to keep the version history of your project because it just makes your life easier. So if maybe you implement a feature and it works really well, you'd make a commit on that, but then a week later you add a new feature and that feature is broken, so you need to go back to the old version, Git can help you to do that. And I don't want to go too much into detail on Git here. Maybe we'll talk about that in another video here. But basically know that it allows you to keep track of your project. So what I've just done is I've added a file with a special name called .gitignore. So the Git tool on my computer recognizes this file, and like the name implies, it allows me to ignore certain files. So what that means is when Git is going to save my code, it's going to ignore, like I've just added here, the node modules folder. So again, that folder's pretty big and it can take up a lot of space, and I don't want to have to save that as part of my project. And the reason I can do that is because of the package.json file. So basically you want to assume that you're in this situation where, okay, I'm going to share my code with another developer and they're going to utilize it in some way, right? So when I send it to them, I don't want to say, oh, hey, you got to download 2 gigabytes worth of dependencies too. They don't want to do that. Ideally, they can download the entire project relatively quickly and then install the dependencies on their own machine. So by using a gitignore, we exclude our local copy of node modules, but package.json, like we talked about a little bit ago, is keeping track of what are the dependencies in the project. So if another developer downloads this, or say I have 2 computers and I download this project to another computer, well, that's not a problem. I don't have to worry about node modules not being there because I can just come into the project and I can run npm install, and npm is smart enough to say, oh, well, let me look for a package.json, and then it's going to look for dependencies, and then another form of this that you're going to see is dev dependencies. And so dev dependencies, this is a more advanced topic, but basically dev dependencies are only dependencies that you'll use locally for development purposes. And again, we'll talk about that maybe in another video, but for now, just know that it exists. And what's going to happen when you run npm install is that npm is going to look at both of those lists, so dependencies and dev dependencies, and it's going to say, which of these don't I already have? And it's going to go ahead and install them, and it's going to download them to this node modules directory automatically. So another developer can just pull down that part of your code, run npm install, and then they'll have all the stuff that they need to actually run the project. So pretty cool stuff. So that's the basic idea at play here, right? So we're installing packages in our project, and then we can utilize those packages in our project. So in this case, I'm going to say, I want to pull in that Cedar package. So I'm going to say Cedar equals require. So you're going to see different types of syntax. And this comes down to the different types of JavaScript that you're writing. So in this case, this is known as common JS or require syntax. So I'm going to import or require, in this case, the Cedar package. So when I do this, basically I'm saying I want to use the Cedar package, or actually I should correct that name. It's Clever Beagle / Cedar. So I want to use this package inside of my code here. So what we're going to do, because this package is actually made for a specific type of application using a platform called Meteor. So what we're going to do is we're not going to use this, but we do want to look at an actual example so you can get a feel for how this works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this. I'm going to say don't save that. Don't save that. We'll come back to that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and I'm going to use this rm-rf. So what this is doing is it's helping me to delete a folder. So I'm going to delete that packages folder. I'm going to create it again. So again, we're going to use this make directory packages, cd into packages, and now this will be empty. There's nothing in there. So ls lets me list stuff out. We're going to close that and we're going to open this back up. So we're going to go whoop, and we can see I've got an empty project now. So what I want to do, again, we're going to do npm init-f to set it up so that we can actually install packages. And then what I want to do is install a package that we're actually going to use. So I'm going to say npm I. So I is short for install here. So I can type install, or I can just say I, and npm is going to know what you're talking about. So we'll say npm install --save, and that's going to add it to our package.json file. And then I'm going to install a package called Express. And Express is a very popular Node.js framework. So we're talking about JavaScript here, but we're also kind of simultaneously talking about Node.js. So Node.js is a runtime for running JavaScript in like a server context or a server environment. So basically running JavaScript outside of our web browser. So what we want to do is look and see that, okay, we've installed Express. We can go into node modules, and this is what I was getting at. So Express is a pretty big project. So before that, Cedar package only installed one other dependency, but Express has a bunch of other dependencies that it depends on. So I don't know how many this is. Looks like maybe about 40 or 50, but there's a good amount, and that's justified. So dependencies are going to range in size, so you don't want to look at this and be like, oh no, this is too much stuff. Really, this is just the nature of the beast when you're working with other people's code. Is if you want that functionality, you're going to have to take on whatever dependencies they have for their own package in this case. So don't worry too much about that, but just know that that's why this just populated with a bunch of stuff. That's because Express depends on all this other stuff. So that installed the code in node modules, but it also created inside of our package.json that dependencies block. So we've added Express at this version. So we're saying 4.17.1. So that's the current version of that package as it exists on npm today. And just to make sure that's clear, we'll go back over to npm here. And if I search for Express and I go in, we can see, oh, okay, this is Express. So I can install Express. It's very popular. So you're getting, goodness, near 11 million downloads a week for this thing. And it's a very popular project. A lot of websites that use Node.js to build write their code rely on Express to help them do what we're going to look at, which is define a web server. So what we're going to do is we're going to clear this out, and I'm going to create a new file. So I'm in VS Code, and I can push this new file button, and I'm just going to create in the root or index of my project, I'm going to create a file called index.js. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to import or require Express. So automatically Node is smart enough to know that when I say require and then some name, it's going to go and look for that package inside of this node modules directory. And there's nothing you have to do with that. That's automatic. So we're going to say do that. And just because I've worked with Express quite a bit, I know that one of the conventions is, well, I have to create an instance of Express. So an instance of Express meaning an instance of an Express server, we'll say. That's not 100% correct, but that's the basic idea at play here. So when we say a server or an HTTP server, what we're doing is we're handling HTTP requests. So in Express, we can define different routes or URLs that are supported in our application. So we can say, okay, when anybody visits the root URL, so if we go to something like, and we'll see this in just a second. So if I go to localhost 3000 on my computer, well, this is the root. So sometimes you'll see this trailing slash. So that's just saying the root or the index page of our application. So here I'm going to say whenever anybody visits the root of our application, and I'm going to pull in, so REQ here is short for request and RES is short for response. So request is what is the person asking for, response is what are we going to respond with. And inside of Express, they have a convenient function on the response called send. So I can send a response. And here I'm going to say hello with an exclamation point. So what we want to say is whenever anybody visits this URL, we want to send back the text hello. And then what we need to do in addition to this is we need to actually run this server. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to say app.listen is the method that you use inside of Express. I'm going to say I want to listen for requests on port 3000 on my computer. So I'm going to pass 3000 there. And then I'm going to pass a function that gets called after that code is invoked or after listening has started on port 3000. So I'm going to say console.log inside of there. I'm going to say, okay, listening on, or we'll say listening at HTTP localhost 3000. And I say 3000 in localhost because this is automatically going to start this on localhost because that's the current computer that we're running on. That's the current machine. So there's no domain name at play here like myapp.com. It's just going to be the local machine, and then because we passed 3000 here, it's going to start it on port 3000. Now, again, at this point, we've installed the dependency, and we've created a little test file. So I'm going to use Node to run this. And don't get too freaked out by this. So just to make sure this is clear, you need Node installed in order to do this example that I'm showing you. So if you don't have that already, you can head over to nodejs.org. And this should auto-detect your language if you're outside of the US or an English-speaking country. So nodejs.org, and then you want to download this LTS or long-term support version of this. That way, your example is going to work relative to what I'm teaching you here. You're not going to have any major errors. This is like the latest bleeding edge version of the framework, but this one is like the most stable version. So go ahead and download that. That's going to get you an installer, and it's going to allow you to install Node.js and Npm as well. So you'll automatically get those two together. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and take this, and this is pretty much all we need. And now, so I'm going to say ls again to list, and then we can see I've got this index.js file, and I'm going to type node, and I already have Node installed on my computer. I'm going to say node, I want you to run the index.js file inside of this folder. So I'm going to say node. You can see as soon as I do that, we get listening at HTTP localhost. So just to make sure this is clear, this is coming from here. So I'm going to change this to hot dogs. So I did a control C out of that in case that's not clear. So I'm going to say node index.js. And, oh, well, it would help if I save the file. Sometimes that's kind of necessary. There we go. So we got hot dogs. So that is being printed out by this. So what's happening here is Node is executing this code, and it's saying, oh, you're using the Express library, so let me import that, and then I'm going to use the code from that library. So this project now depends on Express to function. And so if we go to this URL, so I'm going to go to my browser, I'm going to say localhost 3000, wouldn't you know, we get hello. Now, what I'm going to do to show you is we're going to uninstall Express. So we're going to say npm uninstall, and we're going to save this change. So we want to remove it completely from the project. So I've uninstalled it. Now I'm going to say node index.js. Well, now we get an error. So this is saying, hey, wait a minute, you're depending right here on Express, but it's not installed in the project. And so we get a module not found error. So if you get something like this on your own computer, that likely means that you need to install the package, or maybe if you've cloned another developer's project, you need to run that npm install command we talked about, and then you're going to get what you need. So that's it. That's the basic idea at play here with using NPM packages. So like you can imagine, there's a lot of potential here. There's a lot that you can do with this. And it's something that you really want to get familiar with, because there's a lot of great code out there, a lot of great packages, and a lot of stuff that you can use to really benefit your own project. So I highly recommend kind of playing with this a little bit. Definitely go on NPM and kind of poke around, explore the packages, maybe do some searches for popular NPM packages like Express, and just kind of play around and try out, similar to what we just did with Express, all these different examples, because this is some really cool stuff, and it can really make your projects that much more powerful and that much easier to develop. So that's going to do it for this episode of Feature Fundamentals, folks. If you haven't already, make sure to go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below, and then hit the bell right next to it to get notifications as soon as these are released. So thanks for watching, and we will see you for the next episode.